Hello and welcome to my major project submission titled Biopath. I have completed a team project with a fellow student, Patrick Veronica. I will be showing the work I have done for the project. I have worked on the gameplay, 3D interior models, and pop-up text. Patrick has worked on the level design, will be creating cutscenes for the game, and the overall environment and the UI. All the audio included in the game is directly from Freesound. The game story consists of the player playing as a character called Zinc, who is a 50-year-old robot with human intelligence who is also a space traveller created by humans on planet Earth in 2022, as the game is set in 2072, approximately 50 years in the future. The plot consists of Zinc on a space travelling mission, but due to a technical issue with his spaceship, is forced to make an emergency landing on the nearest possible planet. Zinc is then ambushed by two robots who inhabit the planet, wanting to know who he is and why he is on their planet. Zinc tries to explain himself at first, but as shown in the text, the bots are reluctant to hear his side of the argument. However, when Zinc mentions he is from planet Earth in the text, the robots become intrigued about who Zinc is for reasons explained at the end of the story, offering him the ability to leave if he can pass a total of 3 different psychological game challenges they set out for him. The first challenge consists of a colour memory test. In this challenge, the player will be completing a colour memory test set in a cafeteria building with 4 different floors, with the player required to progress past each floor. Each floor has a different themed colour, with each floor having the same design layout. In the middle of each floor, there is a map with a range of different coloured assets from the room. The player must memorise each of these assets before the timer runs out. When the player starts moving, they will walk into a trigger volume which will turn all the lights on in the room for a specified period of time. Once the timer runs out, the lights will then go off again. Once the lights go off, a widget will pop up with 3 multiple choice answers, along with a question asking the player to name the colour of an item that was on the mat. If they guess correctly, they would advance to the next round. If they guess incorrectly, they will have to restart the round. To help the player even further, a rendered image with no textures applied will be shown in the pop-up widget. The player will be given more time the further they get within the challenge. However, more assets will be added to each floor the further the player gets. The player will also be given a 10 seconds left warning for each room to notify them when the lights are about to go off. One feature I tried to add in but couldn't fit in due to an unknown error was the principle of providing the player with a different question if they are to guess incorrectly on the first question on one of the floors, to keep the unpredictability of the challenge going. I also added blocking volumes past the mat apart from where the player starts to prevent the player from getting outside of the proximity of the mat whilst they are playing the game. When creating the 3D models and designing the layout for this challenge, I made sure not to include too many assets in one area so the player wouldn't have any trouble finding or navigating past any assets along each mat. Something that I became increasingly aware about when designing the layouts for the more challenging floors, and was something to definitely make Patrick aware of when he was designing the layouts for this official level. I also made sure to let Patrick know where the ceiling lights would be placed at the top of the room and how intense they needed to be so the player would be able to see the colour of each asset very clearly. When creating the 3D models in Maya, I wanted to create a range of sci-fi styled 3D assets that would typically fit a cafeteria scene. I also made the base texture for the models around the environment either white or grey so the player wouldn't get distracted by any other random colours in the environment besides the themed colours of each floor. One change I did make was the decision of removing one of the multiple choice option buttons for each question widget. As I had mentioned previously in my prototyping development log that the multiple choice answers were overlapping one another, and removing one of the options allows for me to create a widget where I could space out the options button better, thus preventing them from overlapping. The second challenge is a reading test set in a library building. The building consists of 5 floors that the player can navigate via a stairwell. To pass this challenge, the player must gain access to the key that will allow the player to exit the building via the bottom floor exit door. To gain access to this key, the player must search through the bottom 4 floors to find a printed number sheet with 1 number per floor. These numbers will be hidden on each floor. The player will then use these numbers that are hidden in these rooms to gain access to the top floor where the exit door key is by unlocking the door for the top floor room, which is locked via a key code. The numbers they find in each room equivalent to the pin code in the order of the floor they are found on. The pin is 7220, which is an anagram of the number 2072, the year the game is set in. For this challenge, I included several mechanics, the first being animations for some of the objects in the rooms triggered by the player walking within the proximity of the object, also playing a sound effect when activated. The second mechanic is the health bar, which is activated by the player stepping over an explosive hidden somewhere underneath each floor, which takes away 20% of the player's health. If the player steps over all 5 of the triggers hidden underneath each floor, they will have to restart the challenge. The third main mechanic is the sliding doors, which activate once the player has obtained the correct pin and key for both doors, causing them to animate by sliding open so the player can progress through the challenge. For this challenge, I made sure that Patrick scaled the assets for the layout correctly, so that way the player will be able to fully check out all the objects within the room without any size or height restrictions from the player character. I also made sure that the pop-up text widgets didn't overlap one another, which was something that was an issue during the prototyping phase. To prevent this, I separated my text box triggers and animation timelines better than before to space them out when the specific text boxes would pop in the game. One part of this challenge I particularly struggled with initially was getting the doors to slide open, as I was required to use animation timelines in the blueprint editor. Despite them not being perfect in game, I was happy that I managed to overcome this issue. I also put a lot of focus onto the player navigation by showing an example of the numbers they will be looking for at the beginning of the game and putting a pin reminder in midway up the stairs, as this is something I felt the player may need to be reminded of more than once, especially since the game is targeted towards younger audiences. The third challenge consists of an audio memory test set in the robot's AI control room. The aim of this challenge is for the player to match up the correct audio cue coming from one of the AI bots in the test tubes in the room with a cue they will automatically hear it through an audio scanner at the start of each room. If they guess correctly, the player will be given a key card that they must pick up and scan on the terminal at the end of the room to open the door and go up an elevator that takes them to the next floor, where they will repeat the challenge but with more test tubes in the room. If they guess incorrectly, the platform they step on to hear the audio activate the tube will give the player an electric shock, causing the player to lose part of their health. If the player guesses incorrectly 5 times, they will have to restart the challenge. To help the player, I have added in a feature where the player can search through several audio crates in a room to find a cube that will play the audio again only once. This was a late feature I added in, as I initially felt that the difficulty for this challenge was too high for the target audience we're aiming for. When creating this challenge, timing my blueprints and widgets in the level was a big principle to be aware of, as I had a lot of interactions on the individual floors, so both placing and spacing each one of them out was important, so there were no overlaps or inconsistent functions within the gameplay. I also needed to make sure that all the animations and blueprints within each of the floors were identical, such as the speed of the doors and crates opening up. The number of crates on each floor and the number of audio cues allocated to each specific floor were important components to watch out for too. One part of this challenge I did struggle with, however, was getting the elevator platforms into the game, as Patrick had initially designed a different style of tunnel that the player would go up in, which was not suitable for the platform that I had created, meaning that I had to recreate the tunnels and create a new layout. Once the player finishes the challenge, they will be teleported back to their spaceship, this time facing directly behind it with the 2 bots standing either side of the spaceship entrance. The player is instructed to walk towards the bots, where they begin to engage in another conversation, letting Zinc know that he has passed all the challenges and is free to leave the planet. However, before Zinc leaves, he asks the bots why they wanted him to complete those particular types of challenges. The bots then eventually admit that the moment that he mentioned he was from planet Earth, it's because they themselves also believe that they were created by human inventors on planet Earth and sent to this planet, feeling abandoned, and even admitting to never seeing any other form of life before, explaining the defensiveness they showed towards Zinc at the beginning of the story. Zinc, absolutely shocked at the discovery, even admits that he doesn't even know the origins of who invented him, befriending the robots in the process, with the robots even offering him to visit again in the near future, leaving the door open for a potential sequel for this game in the future for me and Patrick to create as well. Once Zinc leaves, he gets into his spaceship, where the player then is notified that they have completed the game and have the option to either restart the game or quit the game.